I've been able to create a curriculum that works for almost any student who is willing to work and willing to put in the work, whether they haven't taken a class at all in school and they want to take the test, or whether they've been in school and been studying for the year and they just need to prep. In either case, any student can come to me and I'll be able to help them with what they need to do to get a 5 on the AP US history test. The curriculum is divided into 3 main points that will be used at different levels depending on the student experience. The first thing that needs to be checked to get a student ready is their knowledge of the content. Unfortunately, there's not an easy way to get around the fact that the students have to know the facts that are in the curriculum for AP. There's a PDF out there that lists the content that students need to be able to master, but even if they master all that content, it may be more difficult than just memorizing a list of facts. So they not only need to know facts, they need to know context, and they need to know how those facts fit together. And so what I have for that is something called the Persia GT timeline, which sounds more complicated than it actually is. Students will work with me over the different units, the different periods in the AP guidelines. And for each period, they will develop a set of facts that are based on the AP curriculum so that they can understand the order that things happened, when they happened, the important figures, and how all those pieces fit together. And that falls into categories that are in the acronym Persia GT, which is simply politics, economics, religion, society, ideology, art, geography, and technology. If students create a timeline that can fit all those characteristics, that they can say what happened in period 1 according to politics, in period 1 according to economics, and so on, and then do the same thing again using period 2 and 3 and so on, generally students end up with a much better knowledge than they did before. This is not usually what happens in a school curriculum. Even in a private school or a public school, in any school scenario, AP teachers usually have to meet multiple sets of criteria, not just AP criteria when they're taking an AP course. So it's not, and the teachers are not always as well versed in the actual test itself. They don't always teach to the test, which is good for learning history knowledge, but with me, they're going to be focused especially on the kind of knowledge that will help them get a 5 on the test. So with the students and I will make sure they can understand that information first. At the same time that we're working on building the historical knowledge, and I have many different lectures and materials that apply to help students understand and connect those pieces. Then we'll also be working on building up their ability to take the test. These are the other 2 parts. The second part is multiple choice strategy, and the third part is essay strategy. I have what is called the multiple choice safety system, which I have developed through my 7 years now doing SAT and ACT prep, which is the most reliable method to do well on any multiple choice test. Any multiple choice test can apply these principles, and if a student is following my multiple choice safety protocols, then their test taking skill is not going to be an issue. The only issue that will stand in their way will be how well they know the content for the AP history, the US material, the names and dates and events and connections. The safety protocols are very simple and they're easy to master, and it usually doesn't take too much to get students understanding what, if at all, how they've been doing multiple choice tests wrong. Then the third component, which is often one of the most challenging components for students, is the essay portion. And this is very frequently the place where schools, public or private, doesn't matter, where history instructors are not always the best writing teachers. But I have been teaching writing for even as long as I've been doing test prep, and longer than that. And I've been writing myself in a professional capacity for even longer than that. So I'm able to teach composition and thesis building and essay writing to a degree that there are very good history teachers out there, no doubt, but very few of them have the same kind of combination of skills that I do in being able to talk about history in a clear and meaningful way, as well as know exactly how the AP essays are structured and how to teach students how to structure their essays as well. So while we're learning about the content for the history facts, we'll also be working on developing how to write a good thesis, how to structure an argument, how to meet the standards required by the AP essay guidelines. I have a system set up especially for that. And fortunately, that's one of the benefits of the Persia GT system, is that the Persia GT system also allows students to much more easily understand the kind of things that they need to use in the LEQ, the long essay question, and the document-based question by analyzing the topics for LEQ or the documents for DBQ according to the Persia GT standards. It's much easier for students to compose their essays. And so during the time we're studying the facts, we'll also be working on thinking about how to construct those essays, which are often the biggest issue for students to getting a 5. The number of classes required to complete the course depends on the student. A student with a really high proficiency and a great deal of knowledge coming to me, then maybe we would only need to check in so that I could get a sense of how well they know to make sure that they don't have any blind spots. And then most of our time would be spent on multiple choice and essay writing. If a student is coming in completely cold, it's going to take more time than that, but we can set the number of hours required to effectively complete the course depending on students' needs. The curriculum is very flexible, and it's complete for any student that comes to me. The only thing that'll stop a student from getting a 5 if they're working with me is how much effort they're willing to put in and how much homework they're able to do in between our class times. So I'd be happy to answer any more specific questions about curriculum or content that you have. If anybody has any questions, please fire away. Each essay has its own differences, but fundamentally the task that the students are doing is the same. Whether it's the short answer or the DBQ or the LEQ, they're always going to need to formulate a thesis, and they're always going to need to be able to support that thesis with evidence and then analyze how that evidence supports the claim. So I focus on first teaching those fundamental skills so that they can construct a thesis that responds to the prompt, whether it's a short answer prompt, and a long essay question prompt, or a DBQ prompt. Then how they can find the evidence, whether they have to create it themselves or they take it from the document in the DBQ, and then how to effectively prove the point that you're trying to make by looking at the evidence that you've chosen. All three of those types work together in the same way. Once students have mastered a short answer question, it's not very complicated to take those skills and transfer them to the other types of essay questions. But of course, there's different strategies for both. We practice all different kinds of the essay with the different strategies for each, but the individualization of each one is less important than making sure that those fundamental skills are strong. And at that point, what used to be confusing and complex and mysterious, the students understand much more clearly how to approach it. Persia is important because one of the things students struggle most with, almost more than anything else, after a year, even if they've had a year in APUSH and they're just getting ready to take the test, is that they have forgotten what they learned at the beginning of the year, because it's now, April or May, and they don't remember anything that they learned last September. So it's very important to put together the information in a meaningful way. That's one major reason. The second major reason is that as they study, some teachers chop things up. They don't do things in chronological order. The students can understand the importance of certain specific moments, but they don't know how those specific moments connect to other specific moments. And so that's where contextualization, which is important for the essay, comes in, so they can connect what happens first and what happens next, and then synthesis, the parallels between different periods that they need to understand as well to get those essay points. Persia allows them to do that because they're taking things in order, but not just randomly memorizing facts, connecting them in meaningful ways. So the political timeline is different than the economic timeline. You could talk about economics without talking about politics, and you could talk about politics without talking about economics. But when you create the two different timelines and you see how they relate to one another, it's much easier to draw connections and to make those contextualizations that can be difficult when you do things out of context. We create these timelines together as part of our homework. So what usually happens is I will do a lecture about the particular period. I'll discuss the important moments and how these, I'll create a larger narrative for a particular era. And then the students will do research from their textbook. Whatever their school textbook is the one that we'll use. If there isn't one, I have one that I like to use, which is the U.S. and the American Pageant is the one that's the name of it, the Great American Pageant. And they'll use that textbook and they'll read the chapters, because there's nothing that can get you out of just reading the chapters as the best way to learn information. And American Pageant does a great job of putting those, I think it tells the story more clearly than other textbooks. So they'll read a chapter or two chapters at a time, and then they'll build their timeline that way. I also have them add images. Part of the process of memorizing the facts is having them do Google image searches for particular topics. So as this Google document is created, or the shared document, depending on the access to it, as the shared document is created, they're constantly spending time looking through the document that they already did. It's very hard to beat actual hands-on data collection and putting it into place, because it passively creates connections in the mind about particular topics. And then as you scroll through to get to the next section, you're seeing the same material over and over again without even consciously being aware of it. So you're consciously aware of it in one hand, and then there's passive reinforcement along the way.